I would like to speak very, hopefully briefly, on the Newman Prize for Chinese Literature and just to address two very simple questions, what and why. The what is much more straightforward, and hopefully I'll be able to get through much more quickly. Probably most of you are familiar with it, but the Newman Prize for Chinese Literature is now in its this is the third Newman Prize. It's awarded biennially every other year in recognition of outstanding achievement in prose or poetry. And we've now finished our first cycle, prose, poetry. So we're going to be back to prose 2 years from now. That best captures the human condition and is conferred solely on the basis of literary merit. And we feel very strongly about this issue, and that's one of the things that sets our prize off from many of the prizes that currently exist for Chinese literature in Asia. Any living author writing in Chinese is eligible, so there are no national boundaries, and this is notably the first time that a Taiwanese writer has won the Newman Prize. The first two were won by mainland Chinese novelists, Mo Yan and Han Shaogong. And the prize consists of a $10,000 check, which is in here, and has been since this afternoon, survived a trip home and a trip back, and a medallion, which you will see shortly, that we designed several years ago, and a certificate and a plaque. And it may serve to crown a lifetime's achievement or direct attention to a developing body of work. And we are very proud of the method through which we select our Newman Prize winners. And in developing that method, we drew very heavily on the work that was developed by the Neustadt Prize in the way that they select their winners. And the way it works is that we bring together an international jury of distinguished experts to both nominate the candidates, and that occurs in the beginning of the summer. Nomination statements are written that each of the other jurists then read over the summer, and there are representative works that are read over the summer, and then we convene in the fall. And we select the winner, and I say we, but I'm actually not included because I am not an expert and I do not participate in the actual proceedings. I'm just sort of the referee. But basically the way it works is successive rounds of positive elimination. So jurors vote for all but one candidate in each round, and whoever has the least votes is eliminated. There's opportunity for discussion, and then there's continued voting until finally in the end there is just one candidate remaining. This last year, the jurists and their nominees were Michelle Ye from UC Davis, who is here. If you'll please stand, Michelle. And Jennifer Feely from Iowa is also here with us today. And there are three other jurists who could not join us today. Michelle Hawkes of the University of London, SOAS, who nominated Yang Lian, and Wolfgang Kubin of Bonn University, who nominated Jia Yongming. And actually, he gave a talk here at OU just a few weeks ago, and that was also a collaboration with Jonathan Stalling and the Institute for U.S.-China Issues. And the final jurist was Zhang Qinghua of Beijing Normal University, who nominated Ouyang Jianghe. And of course, I think you all realize that the Newman Prize honors Harold and Ruth Newman. So that was a big, actually that's really one of the first why for the Newman Prize is I was just thrilled at the opportunity to come to OU and help fulfill the dream of creating an institute for U.S.-China issues. And when the opportunity came along to name a prize after the Newmans, I was just thrilled. But there's also a deeper why, because you might ask why an Institute for U.S.-China Issues run by a political scientist, specifically a political psychologist who's interested in Chinese foreign policy and American foreign policy and U.S.-China relations, would get into the literature game. And it's a very good question. So I think I'm finally going to try to answer it. Whether I can do so satisfactorily or not, you'll have to be the judge. And I hate to be a little bit serious, but I am a worrywart about U.S.-China relations. And that is because my basic assessment of the bilateral relationship is that while we have superficial stability and calm, we have volatility just under the surface. And so my basic assessment is that we lack that fundamental mutual trust that we really need to maintain long-term peace, which I think is everyone's shared goal. So how do you develop mutual trust? How do you move beyond the ideology that so powerfully shapes how Chinese understand America and Americans understand China? There are no easy answers to that question, and there are no quick fixes. It really is going to be a long and difficult job of generating mutual trust to firm up the foundations of U.S.-China relations. And I, believe it or not, believe that literature can be part of that answer. And I think I first had that intuition when I read Lu Xun as a third-year Chinese student, and I was really able to see the world through the perspective of Lu Xun's Chinese protagonists. Yes, I could relate to A.Q. and many other Chinese of Lu Xun's protagonists. But I've recently, as I've gotten more and more into social psychology, actually learned that there is a bit of a scientific basis for this feeling that I've always had. And it comes out of the literature on perspective taking, which is related to the broader thesis in social psychology about how you reduce prejudice in intergroup relations. It used to be thought that if you create more contact between groups, they'll come to understand each other better, and that will improve, it will reduce prejudice, improve intergroup relations. And indeed, much of the civil rights movement in the United States led to policies like busing that were premised on this assumption that if we put, for example, black and white high school children together in the same high schools, that prejudice would be reduced. And in fact, we found that that was not always the case, that sometimes increased contact can actually exacerbate prejudice and conflict. And so what social psychologists started to do is look at the specific conditions under which greater contact would reduce prejudice. And they found that greater knowledge was one mechanism or mediator, but not the strongest. That two other mechanisms were even more important, and one was perspective taking and another was the related concept of empathy. And one thing that a group of social psychologists I've recently learned about, reading a pretty incredible book by a social psychologist named Steven Pinker. The book is called The Better Angels of Our Nature, Why Violence Has Declined. And I'm going to quote from this book. Steven Pinker writes, quote, "Reading is a technology for perspective taking. When someone else's thoughts are in your head, you observe the world from that person's vantage point." And indeed, the cultural historian Lynn Hunt has made a very similar argument about the rise of the printing press and the flourishing of novels and the reduction of violence in Europe. She argued that reading novels contributed to the emergence of human rights discourse in Europe. So, for example, novels like Rousseau's Julie, quote, "enabled readers to empathize across class, sex, and national lines." So it seems to me there's an increasing body of evidence that shows that literature, novels and poetry, and in terms of poetry, we're soon going to be talking about the Newman Young Poets Award. But Donovan, who is sitting over there, the first grader who is about to be conferred the award for the elementary school level, actually put me into the body of a mouse when I read his poem. And I think that that matters. I think that when we are able to see the world through someone else's or even some other animal's perspective, it simply changes the way we view the world. And it's the kind of thing that can allow us to connect with people across divisions and overcome anxieties and fears and generate mutual trust. And so that is the idealistic why behind the Newman Prize for Chinese literature. So with that, I'd like to invite Christopher Young and his band. I'm sorry for the very last second prompt here. Is Chris ready? Because we could hold off a little bit. Couple of minutes? Okay. So in that case, we'll move right on to Donovan, and if it's okay. And I'd like to introduce Jonathan Stalling, my colleague in the English department. He's Associate Professor of English, and he is the editor of Chinese Literature Today. And he is truly a godsend for Chinese studies at OU. And I personally am tremendously grateful for Jonathan's presence here at OU and his camaraderie and his intellectual, just a wonderful friend and a delight to work with. So much of what happened in this Newman Festival would not have been possible without Jonathan. From the library exhibit opening this morning to this truly incredible Young Poets competition that he masterminded this year. In past years, we've done a Young Writers Award with a single winner each year, so confined solely to high school. And this year, it just expanded tremendously. And Jonathan will tell you about that, and then we'll be awarding the Young Writers, the Young Poets Awards. So with that, Jonathan.